I never planned to fall for her. But the way she brushed her hair back that night, smiling like she knew a secret about us, that was the moment everything quietly changed. I hadn't seen her in weeks, but the moment she stepped into the room, it felt like the air shifted, just slightly, almost imperceptibly, but enough that my chest tightened before I even understood why. She carried herself the same way she always did. Calm, composed, quietly confident. Yet there was something softened around her eyes tonight, something warm that settled on me the instant her gaze found mine. We ended up sitting together after everyone else drifted off to their conversations. It wasn't intentional. It never was with us. Somehow we always gravitated to the same corner of the room, the quieter space where voices blended into a gentle hum, and it felt a little easier to breathe. She asked me how I'd been, but it wasn't the casual question people throw out automatically. She tilted her head slightly, watching me with this attentiveness that made it impossible to give half-hearted answers. So I told her about work, about the small frustrations and the unexpected wins. She listened the way very few people do, like she was collecting every word, storing them somewhere meaningful. When she laughed at something I said, she rested her hand lightly on my forearm, a spontaneous gesture she didn't seem aware of. Her fingers were warm against my skin, steady in a way that made the rest of the room blur out for a split second. It wasn't a romantic touch, not really, but it wasn't casual either. It was the kind of touch someone uses when they're comfortable with you, perhaps more comfortable than they realize. I felt her pull back eventually, but the warmth stayed. As we talked, she occasionally brushed her hair back behind her ear, a small, graceful motion, as if she needed her face unobstructed to really look at me. Each time she did it, I noticed the same quiet pattern. She'd inhale slightly, almost as if steadying herself, then meet my eyes with an openness that felt new. I told myself I was imagining it. She was older, more grounded, someone who lived with the kind of intention I was still trying to figure out. We weren't supposed to orbit this close, but the space between us felt strangely charged, subtle, warm, unspoken. She leaned back in her chair, relaxing in a way she didn't often allow herself. "You've changed," she said suddenly, not in a heavy way, but with a soft smile. "There's something different about you lately." I asked what she meant, but she just shrugged, her eyes flicking over my face thoughtfully. "I don't know. Maybe you just seem more sure of yourself, more present." The compliment landed deeper than it should have. Coming from her, everything felt like it carried a second layer beneath the words. The evening faded slowly around us, conversations quieting, lights dimming. Yet neither of us moved. Neither of us seemed eager to break whatever was settling between us so naturally. I left that night telling myself it was nothing. But the truth was simple. Something had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly enough that I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something I didn't yet understand. What started as a few accidental moments together slowly turned into a quiet rhythm neither of us acknowledged out loud. We'd see each other at the same places at the same times, always by coincidence. Or at least that's what we told ourselves. A short walk after the gym. Coffee on the bench outside the community center. 10-minute conversations that somehow stretched into 40. There was nothing dramatic about it, nothing planned. Just a gentle pattern that felt natural, maybe a little too natural. One morning, we ended up at the same cafe. Her picking up something before work, me pretending I had a reason to be out so early. She waved me over with a small smile, the kind that started soft and warmed her whole face. "You're up early," she teased, leaning back in her chair. "So are you," I replied. She didn't deny it. Instead, she wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, letting the warmth soak into her palms. There was something comforting about watching her like that. Calm, grounded, always in control, yet quietly vulnerable in these unguarded moments. We talked about ordinary things at first. Work schedules, upcoming plans, a documentary she'd watched the night before. But gradually, the conversation shifted into something more personal. She told me about a relationship that ended a few years ago, how she had convinced herself she was fine, only to realize later how much it had drained her. She didn't speak bitterly. She spoke gently, with the kind of strength that comes from healing slowly, not perfectly. "I'm still figuring myself out," she admitted quietly. "At this age, you think you're supposed to have everything settled. But life doesn't really work like that." I didn't know what to say at first. She rarely opened up like this. She carried her emotional world so privately that any glimpse into it felt like being trusted with something fragile. So I just listened, fully intentionally. At one point, as she talked, she leaned forward and reached out instinctively, adjusting the collar of my jacket. Her fingers brushed the side of my neck, warm and careful, lingering just a second longer than necessary. The touch startled something in me, something quiet but undeniably real. She didn't seem to realize what she'd done until a moment later. Her hand hovered, as if undecided, before she pulled it back with a soft breath. "Sorry," she murmured, half smiling. "Habit. I'm used to fixing everyone." I shook my head. I didn't mind. Her eyes lifted to mine, and for a second the air between us thickened with a kind of unspoken awareness. Gentle, hesitant, full of possibilities neither of us dared name. Later, when we walked outside together, she kept close enough that our arms brushed occasionally. Each time it happened, neither of us moved away. She talked about a new project at work, and her hand found my arm again, light, steady, familiar. She kept it there as she spoke, not even noticing the way her thumb made small, absent circles on my sleeve. It was such a small thing, but it felt like the beginning of a deeper comfort, one that didn't need words to announce what was quietly forming between us. A comfort that felt safe, maybe too safe, considering how easily I started looking forward to it. It happened on one of those evenings that didn't feel like it should matter, quiet, unremarkable, the kind you expect to forget by morning. But somehow, that night slipped into a different kind of memory. We had both stayed longer than planned after a long day. People trickled out one by one until the building felt almost hollow, lights dimmed, voices fading into the distance. She suggested we get some air, her voice soft, a little tired. There was a gentleness to her tone that made it impossible to say no. Outside, the air was cool enough to raise little goosebumps along my arms. She noticed immediately. "Cold?" she asked, brushing a loose lock of hair from her face as she studied me. "A little," I admitted. She didn't offer a jacket or a solution. Instead, she simply sat beside me on the bench, closer than usual, as if proximity itself was a kind of warmth. We talked slowly, unhurriedly. She shared small things at first, stories from her week, frustrations she hadn't voiced to anyone else, moments that made her laugh. But as the darkness deepened around us, so did the conversation. "You know," she said quietly, "sometimes I feel like I spend so much time being strong for everyone else that I forget how to let myself be tired." Her voice cracked. Not much, barely perceptible, but enough for me to hear the truth hiding beneath her calm exterior. Without thinking, I turned toward her, ready to respond. That's when she reached out, almost instinctively, and brushed her thumb beneath my eye. "You look tired too," she murmured. The touch was slow, ridiculously gentle, her thumb gliding just under the curve of my eye, tracing away something she imagined there. It wasn't a romantic gesture, but it also wasn't something people usually do unless they're already too close, too connected. The warmth of her skin spread across my face, leaving a quiet hum under my ribs. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Her hand stayed there, resting lightly against my cheekbone, her thumb barely moving. And I swear, just for a heartbeat, she seemed to be memorizing the shape of me. Then a breeze swept through, brushing hair across her face. She tucked it behind her ear, but the cold made her shiver. "Come here," she whispered. Not a command, not even a request, just a gentle suggestion. She shifted closer until our shoulders touched. The warmth of her body hit me instantly, soft, grounding, almost startling. Our arms pressed together, and she let out a breath that sounded like relief. "It's strange," she said after a moment. "I feel peaceful with you. I don't get that very often." I didn't know how to answer. My heart was beating too loudly for anything casual to come out. So I just leaned slightly, barely, subtly, letting her know I was there. She didn't move away. The night stayed quiet, the world around us slowing until it felt like the bench, the breeze, the soft glow of the streetlights, and the warmth of her shoulder against mine were the only things that existed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a declaration. But it was intimate in a way that settled deep in my chest, marking the moment with a softness I knew I wouldn't forget. A small shift, a quiet closeness, the kind that stays. Over the next week, everything between us felt slightly different. Not in any obvious or dramatic way, but in quiet glances, in pauses that lasted half a second too long, in the way we both seemed a little too aware of the other person's presence. I found myself looking for her without meaning to, turning my head when I heard her voice, noticing the way her mood changed from morning to afternoon, wondering whether she thought about our bench conversation as often as I did. And she seemed caught between leaning in and pulling back. Some days she spoke to me with the same easy warmth as before, relaxed and open. Other days, she hesitated before meeting my eyes, like she was startled by something she didn't expect to feel. One afternoon, we were helping set up for an event. The room was quiet except for the rustling of decorations and faint music playing in the background. I handed her a drink without thinking, and our fingers intertwined for the briefest moment, a moment that stretched in my chest like a held breath. Her hand froze around mine, her skin warm, soft, steady. She looked up, and the expression in her eyes made something shift inside me. A mix of surprise, tenderness, and a fear she didn't quite manage to hide. Then she pulled back quickly, looking away as if the touch had exposed something she wasn't ready to acknowledge. "Sorry," she whispered, almost too softly to hear. "Just got distracted." But it wasn't distraction. We both knew that. For the rest of the afternoon, she kept a slight distance, still kind, still herself, but careful, like she was trying to protect something fragile between us by not getting too close. Later, after everyone else left, she asked if we could talk. Her voice had that calm steadiness she used when she was trying to keep emotion under control. "Sometimes," she began slowly, "I worry that I'm getting too used to you." I didn't know what to say. My heart beat too loudly in the quiet room. She continued, her eyes fixed on the floor. "You're younger. You have your whole life ahead of you. And she exhaled shakily, "I don't want to pull you into something complicated." I stepped closer just a little, not enough to overwhelm her, just enough to let her know she wasn't alone. "You're not pulling me anywhere," I said quietly. "I'm here because I want to be." She finally looked at me, and there it was again, that soft vulnerability she tried so hard to keep hidden. A tenderness mixed with caution, like her heart was stepping into unfamiliar territory. "I don't know what this is," she admitted, "but it feels natural, too natural." Her voice trembled on that last word, and for a moment I saw past every layer of composure she carried. She wasn't afraid of me. She was afraid of how easy it felt to let me in. I wanted to close the distance between us, to take her hand, to tell her she didn't have to figure out alone. But I didn't move. She needed space, not pressure. So I just stood there in that quiet room with her, the air thick with everything neither of us was ready to say. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a rejection. It was something in between, uncertain, delicate, and undeniably real. A shift that couldn't be undone. The shift between us didn't settle. It grew heavier, like a quiet weight we were both carrying without knowing how to set down. Every moment we spent together felt warmer, closer, more fragile. And that fragility is what made the smallest disagreement hit harder than it should have. It started over something insignificant, a misunderstanding about plans, a misheard comment, a frustrated tone neither of us meant. But the moment tension entered her voice, something inside me tightened. And the moment she went quiet, truly quiet, I knew it wasn't about the tiny argument at all. She tried to brush it off, grabbing her bag and standing too quickly. "It's fine," she said, forcing a neutral tone. "I should go. I don't want to make this weird." The word weird hit me strangely. Nothing about us felt weird. Confusing, yes, overwhelming, definitely. "You don't understand how easy this is becoming for me." I stepped closer, slowly, deliberately, giving her every chance to step away. She didn't. "Tell me what you mean," I said softly. She shook her head, exhaling a breath that wavered on the edge of confession. You're slipping into my life in ways I never expected. I find myself thinking about you at. Her eyes fluttered closed, only for a moment, but long enough that I felt the shift in her breathing. You don't have to control everything, I murmured. That's the problem, she whispered, leaning, just barely, into my hand. I don't know how not to. Her voice wasn't strong. It wasn't guarded. It was open in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. In that moment, everything between us narrowed to her warm skin beneath my palm, her unsteady breath, the closeness we'd been avoiding naming. The argument was forgotten. What remained was truth, quiet, trembling, and finally spoken aloud. And as she stood there with my hand on her cheek and her wrist still resting gently in my other, something fragile gave way inside both of us. Not a declaration, not a decision, but a beginning neither of us could deny anymore. The next day felt strangely quiet, not distant, not awkward, just careful, as if both of us were carrying the memory of yesterday's confession with both hands, unsure where to place it without dropping something important. She asked to meet at the small park near her office. A neutral space, a safe one. When I arrived, she was already sitting on a low stone wall beneath a tree, hands folded in her lap, shoulders drawn in slightly, as if she'd been deep in thought for a long time before I appeared. She looked up when she heard my footsteps, and her expression softened instantly. Not relieved exactly, more like she was finally allowing herself to breathe. Thanks for coming, she said. Thanks for asking. We both smiled, small, tentative, honest. I sat beside her, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her, but not so close that she'd feel crowded. She noticed the distance and, surprisingly, closed a bit more of it herself, shifting until our knees brushed lightly. It was the first time she initiated physical closeness so deliberately, and it settled something inside me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The breeze moved through the leaves overhead, scattering soft shadows across her face. She watched our knees touching, her expression unreadable, then exhaled slowly. I was scared you'd pull away, she said. Why would I asked. Because I showed you too much. She gave a quiet, almost embarrassed smile. I'm not used to letting people see the parts of me that shake. I shook my head gently. You didn't show me weakness. You showed me honesty. Her eyes flickered toward mine, searching, maybe needing reassurance. And that doesn't scare you? No, I said, and I meant it. Her breath caught. Not dramatically, but in that soft, fragile way people do when they've been holding too much inside for too long. She looked down at her hands, fingers twisting together, before slowly unclasping them. Then, unexpectedly, she reached for my hand. Not quickly, not impulsively. She opened her fingers first, like an invitation, and waited for me to accept. When our hands finally met, her fingers threaded through mine with a slow deliberateness that felt more intimate than any kiss could have. Her palm was warm, her grip gentle, but there was a subtle tremble I could feel through every point of contact. I feel alive around you, she said, voice low. And that's terrifying, but it's also comforting. I turned my hand slightly, letting my thumb brush over the back of hers. I feel the same. Maybe we don't have to figure everything out today. She laughed softly. You always say exactly what I need to hear. For a long stretch of time, we just sat there in comfortable silence. The kind of silence that doesn't demand anything, doesn't push, doesn't rush. Her shoulder eventually leaned toward mine, brushing lightly, then settling there, soft, natural, as if her body had finally stopped arguing with itself. You make things feel simple, she murmured, even when they're not. And you make things feel worth it, I replied. Her fingers tightened around mine, not by much, but enough. Enough to tell me she believed me. Enough to tell me she was willing to step into whatever this was becoming. Not with certainty, not with promises, but with presence, with warmth, with a quiet willingness to try. The line between us didn't disappear. It simply softened, turning into something we no longer felt the need to resist. The days that followed felt different, not because anything dramatic happened, but because neither of us was pretending anymore. There was an ease between us now, a quiet understanding that something real was unfolding, even if we hadn't labeled it. But still, there were things we hadn't said aloud, things she held close, things I held quietly in my chest. It wasn't until one evening at dusk, when the sky was washed in soft gold and the world felt a little slower, that those unspoken things finally found their place. She invited me for a walk, though it felt more like she needed company than fresh air. We ended up at a small overlook near the park, the kind of place people only discover if they wander often. From there, we could see the silhouettes of distant houses, the glow of porch lights, the quiet pulse of life happening far away. We sat side by side on the low stone edge. Our knees touched, our shoulders brushed. Neither of us moved away. For a while, we just watched the sky shift from gold to deeper amber. "Do you ever think about how quickly things change?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ich glänzte her." The fading light painted her face in soft tones, making her look both strong and impossibly gentle. "All the time," I replied. She nodded slowly, as if she expected that answer. Then she took a breath, one of those deep, centering breaths she only used when she was about to say something honest. "I didn't think I'd let anyone close again," she said, staring ahead. "I thought I'd built myself into someone too self-contained, too careful." I didn't interrupt. Her voice carried a tenderness that asked for space. "But you—" She paused, searching for words. "You didn't push your way in. You just showed up, again and again, quietly, kindly, until I realized I was looking for you without meaning to." Her admission warmed something deep inside me, something that had been waiting to be seen. I turned toward her slightly. "You make it sound like I did something extraordinary." She finally looked at me, really looked. Her hand lifted again, this time resting over my chest. Not firmly, not possessively, just a soft, open palm over the steady rhythm beneath my shirt. "You don't even realize what you're becoming to me," she said. The words settled over me like a warm blanket, heavy in meaning, light in delivery. She wasn't asking for promises. She wasn't declaring anything dramatic. She was simply naming the truth she'd spent weeks trying to ignore. I placed my hand over hers, letting our fingers overlap, grounding her touch with my own. "I know what you're becoming to me," I said quietly. Her breath caught, soft, barely audible, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in gently, her shoulder resting against mine, her head tilting until it just touched the side of my arm. The world around us dimmed. The last light of dusk slipped behind the trees, and we sat there, close, calm, choosing each other in the quiet. No ruse, no laves, no fear, just a steady, warm beginning, exactly where it was meant to be.